Good morning and welcome to everyone. I'd like to start with the obvious, and that's a thank you to each and every one of you who braved the weather this morning to find yourself here. While I know we might have gotten a little wet or a little inconvenienced today, all of us who live here locally know how badly we need this rain and lots more like it to address the drought that's been in Southern California for a few years. So while we watch this life-giving rain on the outside, try to stay warm and dry on the inside of this beautiful tent. We ordered it just for you this past Friday, and thank the Lord we did. For those I've not had the chance to meet, my name's John Highbush. I have the honor of being the executive director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute. Although, in honor of his birthday, we celebrate the life of Ronald Reagan today, I'd like to say that I know I'd be remiss if I didn't take a moment to mention Mrs. Reagan as well. This is the very first year that we have held the birthday celebration for President Reagan since her passing. She now lies in peace next to President Reagan, and we do most certainly miss her greatly. May I ask for a round of applause in celebration of her extraordinary life and contributions to our country. Before we begin our formal program, I'd like to recognize some very special guests we have with us today. And I'd like to start from the Reagan family. Michael, if you'd stand, please. Michael, Colleen, Ashley, Cameron, and Susanna. Welcome, you all. Thank you for coming. Although we'll hear from Sam Donaldson later today, I'd like to recognize his lovely wife, Sandy. Sandy, great to have you. Our outstanding Congressman, Elton Gallagly, and his wife, Janice, for 24 years as our Congressman. Great to have you. And there's a lot to list, but I'd just like to say thank you to all of the elected officials that are here today from the cities of Simi Valley, Thousand Oaks, Westlake Village, and Ventura. Thank you so much for coming. And finally, a special thank you, of course, to all the men and women here today from Camp Pendleton who have helped us so much with today's celebration. The Reagan, thank you. This is the Reagan Library's 13th year working in conjunction with Camp Pendleton to pay tribute to President Reagan on his birthday, and we are honored to have the support of our fighting men and women from such a vital military installation. On behalf of everyone here, I am sure all Americans, thank you for your service. Thank you. And now on to today's program in honor of the 106th birthday of Ronald Wilson Reagan. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would, please rise for the March of the Colors, the playing of our national anthem, and the invocation by Chaplain Christopher Maris, Captain, United States Navy.
Now, attention!
Let us pray. Good and gracious God, we come once again to remember, honor, and pray for the 40th president. And, as many have wondered, if there could have been a him without a her, we are especially mindful this year of his life partner, Nancy. Together, they famously lived their lives in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health, in public and in private. Friend and foe must acknowledge the irrepressible chemistry of that great love. We continue to benefit today from their great service, but also from the strength of character which they gifted to us as an example. Not to copy so much as to discover our own fortitude through our selflessness, faithfulness, optimism, perseverance, and prayer. So, Lord, for the family and friends they loved, we pray. For the country they loved, we pray. And gratefully bless you for the remarkable hand you had in this man's birthday. Amen.
Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, the Commanding General of Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, Brigadier General Kevin Clay.
Thank you, Mr. Highbush. Mr. Donaldson, flag general officers, distinguished guests, sailors, Marines, fellow citizens, good morning. It's truly a privilege for my wife, Kathy, and I to be here today as President Trump's representatives as we celebrate the 106th birthday of our 40th president. On behalf of all the Marines and sailors for Marine Corps Installations West and Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, thank you for letting us be a part of such a great ceremony to honor a true hero of our country. I would also like to echo Mr. Highbush's thanks to all the Marines and sailors from Camp Pendleton who started out at about 3:30 this morning, 2:30 this morning, to get up here and to be a part of this event. But I can tell you that every one of them is truly honored to be here to celebrate a great president of this nation. So one more quick round of applause for those devil dogs. Thank you. I would also like to take a moment to pay tribute to a woman who brought new life and meaning to everything she touched, the 40th First Lady, Nancy Reagan. This very library is proof of her hard work and dedication as the support she provided to President Reagan throughout his governance of California, his presidency, and of course, their life together. Her very presence was said to have gleaned her husband's confidence, and he often sought her counsel on hard decisions. And of course, we also owe her a great level of gratitude for the initiative she pursued for America's youth. And I will tell you, in the Marine Corps, the spouses of our Marines know the meaning of stepping up and sacrificing so that their husbands and wives can better serve our country. Nancy Reagan set a phenomenal example in this regard, taking on her role as First Lady with a tenacity which rendered her husband's service and leadership to this country all the more impactful. President and First Lady Reagan loved Southern California, and for the past 6 months or so, my wife Kathy and I have shared their affinity for calling this region home. It's no secret that President Reagan had a great appreciation for Camp Pendleton. He frequented the base to visit the troops and occasionally to do some hunting. Camp Pendleton is a preserved example of what he loved so much about Southern California. Rolling hills full of a multitude of animal species and ecosystems, and 17 miles of undeveloped coast, and of course the sound of freedom from the air station and the artillery units supporting our ground combat element that today trains around the clock to be ready when the nation is least ready. Looking back through my years of service, I remember the changes President Reagan made, which heavily impacted those of us in uniform. Expanding the military budget meant improved life-saving technology for Marines, ensuring they had everything they needed to be the most efficient fighting force in the world. It spawned a trend of innovation, which today we still see having an impact on our force. Through his leadership, President Reagan brought pride back to our military, believing that, quote, military service in the armed forces of the United States is a profound form of service to all humankind, and that democracy is worth dying for because it is the most deeply honorable form of government devised by man. Indeed, every Marine here would agree that democracy is worth fighting and dying for. And to this end, we are grateful at Camp Pendleton and all the bases and stations on the West Coast for the support of leaders like President Reagan. Ronald Reagan was a very popular president among the Marines during these early years of my service. I believe that most, if not all of them, had an interesting juxtaposition with our former president. They were ruthless when crossed, tougher than nails in the execution of a mission, and yet powered by compassion. Above all, they are fervent in the defense of their fellow Marines. That is something no enemy of ours has ever been able to emulate, and what makes us definitively Americans. President Reagan was able to harness this type of compassion for his fellow Americans and lead with a confidence that had an air of toughness about it, but was absolutely sincere. His famous saying about Marines, you know the one, some people spend an entire lifetime wondering if they make a difference in the world, but the Marines don't have to worry about that. Well, I'm absolutely certain, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, that President Reagan didn't have that problem either. In closing, it's an honor to be here today on behalf of the Marines and sailors of Camp Pendleton and Marine Corps Installations West. Happy birthday, Mr. President, and God bless you, Nancy.
Thank you, General Calais, and thank you so much for your service to this country. Here at the Reagan Library, we are dedicated to the preservation and promotion of Ronald Reagan's legacy of inspired freedom. We talk about his graceful and effective leadership style. We talk about his ability to reach across the aisle. And we, of course, talk sometimes about his incredible sense of humor. Now, how could we not? Today's keynote speaker is the perfect person to reflect the way in which President Reagan achieved such remarkable success. How he could be friends and respect someone who might not always agree with him, but all in good humor. And in that vein, while looking through President Reagan's speeches, I found over a dozen references to Sam Donaldson as the punchline to a joke. So a few examples. At an event just 2 weeks before he left office, President Reagan joked, "I wonder if this means when Nancy and I go out dancing, Sam Donaldson can't cut in anymore." And just a few weeks prior to that, I think he had Sam on his mind a great deal. While reflecting on what he might miss while out of office, the president joked, "Well, there's the 'your wish is our command' helpfulness of Congress and the courtly courtesy of Sam Donaldson." Speaking to photographers during his first term, President Reagan teased, "I like photographers. They don't ask questions. Can you imagine Sam Donaldson with a camera?" As most of you would say, the thought makes me shudder. I don't know if President Reagan used that speechwriter too much after that. But all joking aside, Ronald Reagan did respect Sam Donaldson greatly, I assure you. He is truly a world-class talent, a remarkable man, and a gentleman. President and Mrs. Reagan became friends with the then ABC chief White House correspondent who always threw and sometimes had to yell the tough questions his way. Looking back, would we have had it any other way? I don't think so. It would be difficult, to say the least, to find a better speaker to honor President Reagan's legacy of diplomacy and friendship on his birthday. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would, please join me in welcoming to the Reagan Library the great Sam Donaldson.
John, you're doing me too much honor. Oh, my. These are my ad libs, unless the general put the thing backwards and I'm going to give his speech again, but not really. My wife Sandy and I are very pleased to be here today. We were here less than a year ago. It was a sad day. We were all saying goodbye to Nancy. I wish she were here, because the two of them loved each other so much. They were a couple, as you well know, and not to have them here in the flesh is something that we all regret. But it's a very great honor for me to be asked to speak about Ronald Reagan. Now, I was ABC's White House correspondent for 3 presidents, and I knew several others, beginning with John Kennedy. But of all of them, clearly Ronald Reagan was the most fascinating, interesting of the lot. And many of you here today knew him far better than I did. Michael leads the way. Good to see you, Michael, and others here in the audience. But I think in the 8 years that I covered his presidency, even if it was from just the press room, I got to know the man and I got to know the president, at least to some extent. Now, he had his critics. Clark Clifford, the distinguished member of the Democratic establishment, once labeled him an amiable dunce. Well, I think Clifford was half right. He was amiable enough, but not a dunce, not for a moment. As I discovered beginning 2 days before his inauguration. He and Nancy were staying at Blair House across from the White House, and one evening he came out to go to a reception at a nearby hotel. And as he walked to his limousine, someone said, "Well, Governor, what's your schedule going to be like tomorrow?" And with great geniality and self-deprecation, he answered, "Well, they haven't told me yet." And I said, with a certain tone of my voice, "Well, Governor, you ought to see if you can't make them tell you what's going on." Mike Deaver says, as the Secret Service was slamming the door on the car, he tried to get out to confront me. At the reception, we reporters were on the sideline, and he came over. He said in a very friendly but quite firm tone, "Sam, they don't tell me, I tell them." And I thought to myself, well, there may be something here. I mean, I'm going to have to take a look at this. Yes, he forgot names. I mean, he did some other things that people who didn't know him would look at. I got to tell you, I remember one time in the Rose Garden early on, he came out to introduce us to the head of state that was visiting him. And he said, I want to present our guest from across the sea, Chairman Mao. Well, who was Chairman Mao? I mean, Mao was dead. I know that. Turned out to be Samuel K. Doe, the president of Liberia. Well, that's okay. I mean, his management style, as you know, was to focus on the big picture. He found good people. He put them in the right job, certainly the first term, and he let them do their job. And if he was somewhat disengaged, even some people said lazy about, all of this, he'd joke about it. Remember, he'd say, well, they say that hard work never killed anyone, but why take a chance? But I soon discovered that when something was truly important to him, as the top guy, he focused on it. He knew what was going on, and he was not hesitant to make a decision. In the first year, the air traffic controllers went on strike. Problem was, it was not legal. It was illegal. He gave them 24 hours to come back, and when they didn't, he fired them. Now, how many presidents looking toward re-election would want to anger organized labor by actually enforcing the law? We took notice, and the Kremlin took notice at that time too. I've always thought there were these two events that helped consolidate public opinion behind him in his early part of his presidency. One was air traffic controllers being fired, and the other, of course, was the firing of a bullet that struck him. I was standing 5 feet away from John Hinckley Jr. that day on the rope line outside the Washington Hilton when Hinckley shot the president and 3 other people. And boy, what a day. Can you imagine the attendance in the George Washington University Hospital emergency room that afternoon when, unannounced, a police car and a long black limousine pulled up, and out stepped the President of the United States from the limousine. First, he hitched up his pants. Deaver said he always did that when he was going to meet the public. He waved, he walked in, and he collapsed. And then, what did he do? How did he conduct himself as he was wheeled into the operating room? Well, he joked, "Honey, I forgot to duck." And to the doctors, "I hope you're all Republicans." And he remembered a line from the old comedian W.C. Fields, "All in all, I'd rather be in Philadelphia." Well, I would think so. It's anywhere but that. Here was the real John Wayne, not in a film, the real hero. And the whole country applauded the play, the movie, because it wasn't a movie. And I think at that point they said, "We got a guy here. We got here somebody that's worthwhile." When he left the hospital, my favorite was when someone asked him, "Well, sir, when you get back to the White House, what are you going to do?" He said, "Sit down." He didn't say, "Well, I'll be looking over the budget, call the President of France, you know." He said, "Sit down." That's what any ordinary person would do with recovering from a bullet. He had a quick wit, and I was the unwitting second banana for one of his best lines. Oh, yes. In 1982, we were still in a deep recession, coming out of it, but things were not good. And at a primetime news conference, he called on me, and I pulled myself up to my full pomposity. I turned slightly so my best side was to the camera, and I let him have it. I said, "Mr. President, tonight, you've blamed this continuing recession on the Congress and mistakes of the past. Doesn't any of the blame belong to you?" "Yes," he said, "for many years I was a Democrat." Well, I sat down. I mean, the whole country laughed. You know, some people have said, John, maybe that they thought there was some special relationship between Ronald Reagan and me. Well, I don't think so, not in the usual sense. I knew he was the President of the United States, and I wasn't. I also can tell you that he called many reporters on occasion to give them a little personal attention, not just me. Although he did call me one night to wish me good luck on my engagement. He said, "Well, you know, Sam," he said, "the song's right. It's better the second time around." I thanked him for the call. I didn't have the heart to tell him it was the third, but I did. But if there was some connection between the two of us, I think it was that two hams may have recognized each other and played off each other. Once at the Berlin Wall, he stepped right up to the first line beyond which the communist Volpos, the police, controlled the access to communist East Berlin, had his toes right on the line. And something got into me, the devil or what have you. And so I called out to him, "Sir, be careful, don't fall in, let the dirty commies get you." He smiled and he danced his right foot across the line. Hey, I'm always happy to be of service. Yeah. But it got me again. But I'm now coming to the most important gotcha, I think, of his whole presidency, one that saved his re-election bid in 1984, and you know where I'm going. The story of those two debates that year with Walter Mondale is well known. But there was a note at the end which, for me, validated President Reagan's oft-stated belief that you couldn't really be president if you hadn't been an actor. Now watch. In the first debate, tired and overbriefed, according to Nancy, he lost it at the end. I mean, you got to be honest about it. I mean, it was gibberish. I mean, and the whole country gasped. We were now in Morning America again. The country wanted to re-elect him, but not if he drooled. So we came to the second debate. And it was Henry Truitt of the Baltimore Sun who asked the key question. And I asked him, do you have any doubt that you're up to serving, fit to serve a second term? "Not at all," came the reply. "And also, I want you to know, I will not make age an issue in this campaign. I am not going to exploit my opponent's youth and inexperience." Okay, here it comes. As a roar of laughter swept the hall, people watching at home saw a sequence of camera shots that sealed his victory for me. You go look at a replay of that and watch what you see that the pool did. No, unintentionally, I'm sure. First, the camera switched immediately to Mondale. He was laughing along with everyone else. That's a great joke on you, huh? And then switched back to President Reagan, who, with a satisfied look on his face, picked up a glass of water, took a sip, and set it down. And I thought to myself, game, set, match. And indeed, he went on to win 49 states. And I will always believe that that old actor, who always knew how to play a scene, deliberately took that satisfied sip of water, which said in not words, "I did it, I'm back." Well, let Reagan be Reagan was the battle cry of the faithful, and he certainly was. He was a man comfortable with himself and his own beliefs, and an astonishing lack of guile in talking to the reporters or the public. Consider, at his first news conference as president, I asked him whether he thought the Soviets were interested in détente or world domination by other means. And out it came. They lie, they cheat, they will commit any crime in furtherance of their... Wow, Howard Cosell, tell it like it is. I mean, the State Department and the Soviets had a cow, but he wouldn't let... Do you know that expression? It's an old country expression. Or a tizzy if you want. But he never let up. He called them out as an evil empire. He told them that Marxism and Leninism would end up on the ash heap of history. And that wonderful moment at his ranch, as he was testing the microphone for his Saturday radio address, he wasn't on the air yet, but we down in Santa Barbara press room heard him say, "Well, I've just outlawed the Soviet Union. The bombing begins in 5 minutes." Whoa. I loved it. His staff, oh no, please. All right. One time he did try to follow the advice to just cool it. And it was on the occasion when U.S. warplanes had forced down an Egyptian airliner which was carrying the terrorist Abu Abbas. He'd taken the Achille Lauro ship and pushed Mr. Klinghoffer to his death and all of that. And we forced down the airplane and we arrested Abu Abbas. And Mubarak, the president of Egypt, was just furious. He demanded an apology. Piracy on the air lanes. And State Department officials pleaded with President Reagan, "Please, sir, don't take the bait about an apology. Just let the dust settle." All right. When he got off Air Force One in some town in the Midwest, I forget where, we were on him. I was on him. "What about an apology, sir? Mubarak wants an apology. What about the apology?" Screaming and yelling at him practically. And with gritted teeth, he walked to his limousine and got into the car. And Chris Wallace of NBC News then found the way to unlock this silence. He yelled at the president, "Sir, do we have anything to apologize for?" "No," came the answer roaring back from inside the limousine. No. Perhaps the best example of this, though, was his speech about the Berlin Wall. He had written into that speech a line telling President Gorbachev to open this gate, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. But the State Department objected because he said it was very, very provocative. You shouldn't do that. And his then Deputy Chief of Staff, Ken Duberstein, says that the president asked him, "Ken, what should I do?" Ken said, "I said, sir, you should do what you think best." He said, "I intend to." And of course he did. And on camera in front of the Berlin Wall with the Brandenburg Gate behind him, John Wayne, the real one, showed up again. I mean, he delivered that line to perfection and to historic effect. As a television reporter, I have to tell you, I liked the idea that his people knew theater. Yes, we used the video, and you could say, well, we sold out. I liked the video. Hard not to like his speeches. Pont de Hoc, Normandy, 1984, D-Day, the anniversary. And we gathered there, and it was 40 years after the Rangers had climbed a near vertical cliff. You've seen the pictures, maybe you've been there, into murderous German machine gun fire. So here we were, on one side, the old veterans, some in wheelchairs, of that climb. On the other side, the television cameras. In front of the great stone Ranger dagger that was in that cliff, Ronald Reagan and a Peggy Noonan script. And turning to the veterans, he said, "These are the boys of Pont de Hoc. These are the men who took the cliffs. These are the champions who helped free a continent. And these are the heroes who helped end a war." There were tears everywhere, and I turned to Jim Baker and I said, "You got me. There's no way I'm going to find any fault with this. It goes right on the air, hot, straight, and true." Perhaps the most important of Reagan productions, though, came at Geneva, Switzerland, on the day when the man who called the Soviet Union an evil empire met for the first time, a maximum leader of that empire, Mikhail Gorbachev. We'd asked the president back in Washington whether he was nervous about meeting this leader, Gorbachev. Oh, he said, oh, no. He said, I once co-starred with Errol Flynn. All right, that's a good preparation. Well, it was a cold November morning in 1985. I thought I would freeze to death in the press area in front of the chateau where they were going to meet. Into the driveway apron came the Russian ZIL automobile, and out of it stepped the Soviet leader, sensibly bundled up in a great coat and heavy scarf. And down the steps from the front door walked the American leader with no overcoat against the cold and just his business suit. Came down, they shook hands, and then President Reagan, age 74, gently took the elbow of General Secretary Gorbachev, age 54, and helped him up the steps to the doorway. And I thought, game, set. Not yet match. That would come later. Of course, in every life there comes a moment of despair, a moment of unhappiness. And for Ronald Reagan's presidency, it was the Iran-Contra affair. For the president, it was his unhappiest time. And for reporters, it was most difficult. We liked the man, but for a long time, President Reagan wouldn't admit that he had authorized the selling of arms to Iran in exchange for the release of Americans held hostage in Lebanon. But a host of friends in and out of government, led by dear Nancy, told him he had to do it because there was talk of impeachment, particularly when it was discovered that some of the money paid by Iran had been diverted, perhaps illegally, to help the freedom-fighting Contras in Central America. Well, he did it. He went on television. And he couldn't, however, say it in so many words. He couldn't bring himself to do that. This is what he said. A few months ago, I told the American people I did not trade arms for hostages. My heart and my best intentions tell me that is true. But the facts and the evidence tell me it is not. He didn't buy alternate facts in those days. I mean, fine. Well, what was he doing? Trying to lay it off on others? Well, I don't think so. I think this man, who had a well-deserved reputation for playing it straight, just couldn't bring himself to believe that he had done something which he thought was right that other people thought was wrong. I mean, he cared deeply about Americans held hostage. He wanted to free them. The method chosen was wrong, and he paid a price for it, but I think I understood his motive. Presidents are paid to make tough decisions, and they are not always right. But when this one stumbled, I thought he stumbled for the right reasons, and I liked him better for it. He regained his footing. He went on to some of the most important work in reducing arms with his friend, Mikhail Gorbachev, and he went to Moscow, and almost arm in arm with Gorbachev, strolled in Red Square by Lenin's tomb. Lenin must have had a fit. I mean, my God. And we mean reporters, we had a field day saying, well, okay, now do you still think it's an evil empire where you're walking? And we just brushed aside as Ronnie and Gorby laughed together. The last time I talked to Ronald Reagan was fittingly on television on November 9th, 1989, as the East German police, the Volpos, stepped aside. The Berlin Wall literally began to crumble. And that night, President Reagan came into his office in Century City here and did a television interview live with me. I was in New York on our set of our primetime magazine program that I did with Diane Sawyer called Primetime Live. And I told him many people credited him with hastening this moment, had he thought it would come so soon. And he said he didn't know when it would come, but he said, I'm an eternal optimist. I believe with all my heart that it was in the future. The people have seen that communism has been tried and it doesn't work. And when I thanked him for the interview, I thought now it was match, the great fulfillment of his lifetime effort to combat Soviet communism was at hand. So, what do I think of who he was? Who was Ronald Reagan? Well, in my view, he was a Hollywood original. As my friend Lou Cannon said in the title of one of his books on Reagan, played the role of a lifetime, using his skill as an actor-communicator to connect with the people of this country and to persuade them to follow his lead. He had convictions and he acted on them. Someone would say, well, he's marching off a cliff. And someone else would say, yes, but he knows where he's going, and I'm going to fall in right behind him. And you don't have to agree with everything that he tried to do, or with his nonchalant work ethic, to acknowledge that he got a lot done. And on the whole, he left the country and the world better off for having been there. At the same time, he was just an unsophisticated, apple pie, ordinary American who didn't puff himself up. He didn't have to. If you got it, you don't have to flaunt it. An optimist who had confidence in himself and helped inspire the rest of us to have confidence in our own future. He made mistakes, and toward the end of his White House days began to slip from the scene. We could kind of see that without knowing exactly why, but it didn't really cause his greatness to slip. And above all, he was a president who loved our country, and he often spoke of the shining city on the hill, which is the United States of America. In his farewell address on television, he described the city this way: in my mind, it was a tall, proud city built on rocks stronger than oceans, windswept, God-blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds living in harmony and peace. A city with free ports that hummed with commerce and creativity. And if there had to be city walls, the walls had doors, and the doors were open to anyone with the will and the heart to come here. In this time of national discord and division, I hope we can see to it that that vision, his vision, continues to describe America. And so on this 106th anniversary of your birth, God bless you, Ronald Reagan. For those of us privileged to have known him, there's a line from my Scottish ancestry that I think of. Comes there another, like our bonnie Prince Ronnie? Not in our lifetime. Not in our lifetime. Thank you. Thank you.
Just extraordinary. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Sam. We all know that President Reagan and Mrs. Reagan lie at rest just several yards from where we are this morning. They had extraordinary lives. I tend to think that libraries like this that they leave behind have a living history of their own. And that history consists of an addition of many moments, important moments. And I just am sure that Sam's remarks today and the time he spent making history with the president will forever be remembered, and they were so important to be documented today with Sam's appearance. So I just want to say thank you again, Sam, so much for coming all the way here. The President of the United States has directed that a presidential wreath be laid at the resting place of all former presidents on the anniversary of their birth. Brigadier General Kevin Calais, Commanding General with Camp Pendleton, California, is designated to place a wreath at the tomb of the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Wilson Reagan, on 6 February 2017, in honor of the 106th anniversary of his birth, and in tribute to his distinguished service to a grateful nation. Please stand.
Order! Order! Order!
Please remain standing for the retiring of the colors and the conclusion of the ceremony with the playing of Anchors Aweigh and the Marines hymn.
Tower colors!
This concludes today's ceremony. Thank you all so much for coming and bearing the weather. Birthday cake will now be served in the Presidential Learning Center, which is just to your right over here. Thank you so much again for coming.